Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Alt J called Relaxer. Oh, I'm not going to be making any fans of this review, mostly because there is very much a reason that I've avoided talking about Alt J, the breakthrough UK indie pop or baroque pop group that I found a fair bit more frustrating than actually likable. Not exactly helped by comparisons to Radiohead that I never thought were all that deserved. And yeah, look, I've listened to An Awesome Wave and This Is All Yours, and to some extent I can kind of see the appeal. They can take some obtuse methods of hitting some sort of melody. They've got a liquid approach to the guitar grooves that I would normally otherwise like. They've got a frontman with a distinctive voice and some writing that on the surface seems somewhat approachable but kind of quirky too. They dabble in other subgenres that are adjacent to rock, particularly electronica, which sparks all the Radiohead comparisons. Yeah, note the word I said dabble, because every listen I've given to Alt J gives me the impression that there is nothing all that striking or compelling beneath all the weird indie pop pivots. The biggest consistent criticism with their first two albums is that they're overstuffed messes, but you know what? That can be redeemed if they add up to something with an edge or maybe something to say. Whereas every single listen I've given to Alt J just finds it all the more hollow and bland and tepid for me. I can tolerate weirdness for its own sake, but frankly, this doesn't feel alien or imposing or challenging or weird. Just obtuse and sterile and sexless. The music that marketers think the lowest common denominator of hipsters actually like. And sure, there are a few pretty vocal harmonies, especially on This Is All Yours. But that doesn't disguise the fact that the records are dreary slogs that go on too long and think they're a lot more interesting than they actually are. And it's not helped by the fact that I find Joe Newman a particularly unengaging and unlikable frontman, especially when you dig into the lyrics. It's one of the reasons I've never found the Radiohead comparison that it made any sense to me, because even though I'm not even really much of a Radiohead fan, Thom Yorke's writing and his intensity was far more compelling than this at his best, and he certainly aims higher with a lot of his song concepts. But hey, you guys wanted me to talk about Relaxer thanks to Patreon, so maybe 3 records in, Alt J will have found something remotely workable? Well, no, not at all. And before y'all lose your minds here, that's not exactly saying this record is precisely awful and terrible, although the low points really do stand out, at least for me, because that would imply that there's something here that's actually worth hating. In reality, maybe just Alt J isn't for me, and Relaxer just proves that fact. But I think the more glaring question is, who the hell is this album actually for? Because the thematic and instrumental muddle on this project can really test my patience, and I can't see audiences really gravitating to this project. I think the place we need to start with this is in a lot of the production and the instrumentation. And again, I'm failing to see what's so damn experimental and challenging and compelling about this project here. For one, it starts off on 3WW with a very lingering, sandy bass progression with slightly off-rhythm snaps that kind of remind me a little bit of the opening bars of Garth Brooks' The River, but with a way less interesting melody, at least until Gus Unger Hamilton and Joe Newman start crooning, and then we get some flutters, a piano, and arranged instrumentation with some of the strings, and I'm left feeling that this is way less romantic or sexy than it's trying to be, especially when you get the buzzy blocks of synth that muddle the mix in the back third, not helped by Ellie Rossel's seeming disinterest in a lot of her bridge. And yet, that feeling of this record's tone and sound being a lot less sensual or raw, that's pretty consistent across this project. From the noisy drums and cowbell behind Hit Me Like That snare that tries to go for psychedelic blues snarl in the guitars and the rubbery organ, and yet forgets any actual bass line to anchor the song, which also happens on the cleaner, brassier In Cold Blood that might have had some weight for me and had a little bit of swagger with actually had a low end that could match that snare and guitar rattle. It's an analogous issue to the panting and deep thrums that run through Dead Crush, which is about exactly what the title implies, complete with an awful squawking delivery from our frontman and extended choppy chipmunk fragments, because of course we needed those. It sounds less creepy or unsettling, more like the unwanted soundtrack, the college guys jerking off to bad erotica that was written 100 years ago. And that's the weird and awkward thing about this album. I'd like to hope that Alt J has at least some self-awareness about how clumsily creepy some of these tracks feel. Adeline is a song that cribs from Hans Zimmer's score of Terrence Malick's A Thin Red Line, which of course is a film about the Pacific Theater in World War II, and yet Alt J interpolates this to this melancholic track where, according to their Twitter, a Tasmanian devil spies on the titular girl, and I think it's going for some form of melancholy that this girl is going away from them, and that he wishes her well, but the mood is just a total mess here. That's before you get the distorted yaz for the surging outro that does not click at all for me. It's not saying that all the hooks are precisely bad when we do get them. In Cold Blood, it desperately needs some nervy tension in the low end, as I said, to really connect for me, but the horns, they sound fine enough, and you know what, I'll give points to the vocal arrangement of Pleader once that song finally gets going after over 2 minutes of instrumental build-up that really wasn't all that compelling. Between the organ and the strings, and in between the jangling discordance and the flutes, there is some potent swell to the song, especially in the final segment, the final verse there. But it does get to be a little bit hilarious when you realize that that whole running phrase, "How green was my valley," it was originally quoted from the book of the same name after the protagonist's first sexual encounter, and not only does Alt J seem to know this context, they're playing it entirely earnestly in context with all the heavy church aspirations, reflecting the same awkward implied "was it good for you" that ran through 3WW. And once you place this record in any sort of extended thematic context, the whole unrequited sexual awakening highlights this record's incompetence, overcompensation, and unintentional hilarity. I mean, critics have already laughed at the line from 3WW, "Well, that smell of sex, good like burning wood," which no, if sex smells like burning wood, that's not a good thing at all. But Pleader, it offers a bounty of riches here, from the Green Valley references to all the mentions of softness and the Queen on the final segment, played without a hint of irony. Now, okay, that's merely hilarious for me, and I already highlighted the creepy on Dead Crush and bizarrely sincere when it shouldn't be on Adeline, but then you have the incompetence on Hit Me Like That Snare, which with its brothel and its sex swings and its Japanese dominatrixes and its fisting, it's trying to be so edgy. And then you get the third verse referencing Harry Potter with a lot of bad puns of all things, and a floor full of happy wizard scissoring. It just completely yanks me out of the song. This isn't sexy, it's not raw, it's not intense, certainly isn't dangerous or reckless, which combined with the instrumentation just leaves me in a kind of a bit of a dead zone, where I have read, hell, I've written fanfiction with more punch than this, both literary and otherwise, even related to Harry Potter. But of course, then we get the other cases that are a little bit less excusable, with the absolute worst case being the extended, tortured, and utterly insulting cover of House of the Rising Sun, a folk song that's most popularized by the Animals in 1964. And I'll be blunt, this is easily the worst cover or interpretation of this song that I've ever heard. Yes, worse than that Five Finger Death Punch cover. Not because of just the shifts in the vocal melody to more major keys, which no, don't do that. Or that it's somehow a full minute longer than the original and it's nowhere close to the groove or muscle thanks to the watery scratch of the guitars that never really goes anymore. Or because Joe Newman sings with the fortitude of a dead cat, which is pretty common across this project. But also because they opt to shift the lyrics in order to refocus on the father figure's alcoholism rather than instead the main character following in his father's footsteps to ruins. And what this also serves to do is pull away any sense of responsibility that might fall on our protagonist's sexual appetites, which is later echoed on the extended ballad Last Year, which casts a much more slow depression and suicide amidst a bunch of callbacks across the album that has his protagonist's partner sing at his funeral at the end of this year. And you know what? I really do loathe the framing of this, because from the dismissive female vocals at the beginning to Marika Hackman's at this conclusion on this song, it rings as a guilt trip towards this girl for not pleasing him that's only getting alleviated on Pleader by him finally getting laid and yet still asking the girl how green his valley was. It's such a fundamentally adolescent worldview, not helped by the usage of the guest singers, a very Chainsmokers-esque validation exercise, and yet with the horns, the elaborate insta-range pieces, the extended runtime, and the reinterpretation of classic songs, it's trying for dramatic bombast that it can't remotely back up with anything close to soul or presence or intelligence or a frontman that can actually command a stage. But again, that's been consistent about Alt J for some time now. A band where awkward references passes for wit, none of the instrumentation is tight enough to match their ambitions, and there's nothing clever or self-aware enough to even pass for ironic in these sort of themes. Again, this is a band passing off as sincere, romantic sentiment the line, "I just want to love you in my own language." Now, to be fair, there are moments where the vocal arrangements, they can kind of connect, but there is a pompous, sexless pretentiousness that reeks across Relaxer, embodied by every 45-minute plus song that should have been cut in half. And you know what? I'm thinking a strong 4 out of 10 and only a recommendation for fans, if that. But considering that I've heard smarter and punchier indie folk, indie pop, indie rock, and even blues rock this year, I don't have any use for this. Next. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can't imagine how this review is going to be remotely controversial given some people's very strong, passionate liking for this band, but no, look, there's nothing to this. It's not nearly as smart as you give it credit. There are so much more interesting and intelligent indie pop and indie rock bands that are so much more worth your time than this group. Beyond that, though, if you guys want to buy the record anyway, links in the description below, and the poll's right there for you to tell me how wrong I am. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation? I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, the link to my Patreon is right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week you guys get to add records to my schedule if you're in that higher tier. More details right there, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.